It was a quiet afternoon on our ranch. The golden sun spread across the wide fields, and the sound of birds filled the air. My daughter Emily was playing near the wooden fence chasing after our old sheepdog Duke, who barked joyfully at her every move. The ranch had been in our family for generations, and it was more than land to us. It was a piece of history, a place of roots and resilience. Emily loved running barefoot through the grass, and I enjoyed watching her laughter echo through the open space. That peace, however, was broken by the sound of a car crunching its tires down our gravel driveway. Out stepped a woman with sharp eyes and a clipboard clutched tightly to her chest. Her heels were out of place on the dusty ground, and her frown deepened as she looked around, as if the land offended her. It was Karen, the head of the new HOA that had sprung up after a group of newcomers moved near the edge of the county. She marched toward Emily without hesitation, and I could feel Duke stiffen and growl low in his throat. Karen stopped a few feet away and pointed her finger toward my daughter. "Your child is trespassing," she declared, her voice sharp and commanding. Emily froze, confused, glancing back at me with wide eyes, as if she had done something wrong. I walked forward slowly, keeping my voice calm but firm. "She is not trespassing. This is her home." Karen's expression hardened. She shook her head, flipping through the papers on her clipboard. "This land falls under the jurisdiction of our HOA now," she said with confidence. "Rules are rules, and children are not allowed to play near the shared boundary fence. She must leave immediately." I could see Emily's small frame trembling beside Duke, who stood protectively at her side. My jaw tightened, but I did not raise my voice. Instead, I stepped between Karen and my daughter. "This is not HOA property," I told her firmly. "This ranch has been in my family for over 150 years. Karen sneered, as if I were just another stubborn neighbor she had dealt with before. Her words cut through the air. "I will call the police if you refuse to cooperate." The ranch fell silent except for the rustling of the wind through the trees. Emily clutched my arm and whispered, "Daddy, are we in trouble?" I looked down at her and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "No, sweetheart, we are not in trouble." Karen stood tall, waiting for me to back down, but I stayed rooted like the oak tree at the center of our ranch. I could see her confidence waver just slightly when I said the next words. "You should know something before you make that call. I am a veteran." Her face paled instantly, the color draining as those words hung heavy in the air. The authority in my tone was not one she could dismiss easily, and she knew it. She looked at me, her lips parting, but no words came out as Duke growled once more, low and protective. Emily looked from me to Karen, her eyes filled with trust, knowing I would protect her and our land at any cost. Karen shifted on her heels, clutching the clipboard tighter, as though it could shield her from the truth she had just learned. But she was already realizing this was not a battle she could win. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of the chaos around her. Her little hands still clutching the reins of her pony, while Karen pointed and yelled as if she owned the land. I stepped forward, my voice calm but firm enough to cut through the noise. "Karen, you need to stop this right now," I said as I walked closer, my boots pressing into the dry earth with steady steps. She turned toward me, her face red with anger and her voice sharp with entitlement. "This is private property," she snapped. "Your daughter has no right to be here, and neither do if you're not part of the HOA. Sarah looked up at me, her eyes wide and uncertain, but I gave her a reassuring nod. I had been through much worse than this, I thought to myself, much worse than loud voices and false claims. Karen had no idea who she was dealing with, and I could see her confidence starting to falter as I stood tall in front of her. My voice stayed level, but each word carried the weight of truth. "This ranch has been in my family for generations, and my daughter has every right to ride her pony here." Karen scoffed as if brushing off my words, but I could see the way her eyes flickered uncertainly. She was used to bullying people into submission, but I was not the kind of man to back down, especially not when it came to protecting my daughter and my land. Sarah tugged gently at my sleeve, whispering softly, "Dad, why is she so mean?" I bent slightly and gave her a small smile, whispering back, "Do not worry, sweetheart, she will understand soon enough." Karen crossed her arms, tapping her foot on the ground, her impatience written all over her face. Then she pulled out her phone, threatening to call the cops again. I simply folded my arms and waited, letting the silence stretch heavy between us. Because I knew the truth would unravel soon, and when it did, Karen would not be the one in control anymore. Karen pressed the phone to her ear, her voice dripping with self-righteousness as she explained her version of the story to the dispatcher. She kept pacing back and forth, her heels digging into the dirt, as if she were preparing for a battle she thought she had already won. Sarah stayed close to me, still clutching the reins of her pony, her small face filled with worry but also curiosity as she watched. I rested a hand on her shoulder, steady and strong, letting her know she had nothing to fear. Karen hung up the call and smirked as though she had just set a trap. "The police are on their way," she announced confidently. "You will regret defying the HOA." Her words rolled off me like rain on a stone because I had already lived through harder confrontations than this. Sarah squeezed my hand, whispering, "Dad, what will happen now?" I crouched down so my eyes met hers, and I said calmly, "Nothing, we cannot handle, sweetheart." She nodded, her trust in me absolute, and it gave me strength. The sound of distant sirens soon carried across the quiet stretch of ranch land, the kind of sound that made neighbors peek from behind their curtains. Karen straightened her blouse, fixing her hair like she was preparing for her moment of triumph. When the police car pulled into the driveway, its lights flashing against the fading evening sun, Karen rushed forward, pointing toward us like a commander giving orders. "Officers, that man and his daughter are trespassing," she declared. "They refuse to obey HOA rules, and they are disturbing the community." The officers stepped out, their faces unreadable as they listened carefully. I stayed silent for a moment, letting Karen dig her own grave with every exaggerated word she threw into the air. Then, when the officers finally turned their eyes to me waiting for my side, I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a neatly folded document. Sarah watched wide-eyed as I handed the papers over to the lead officer, my voice even and steady. "This is my property," I explained. "My family has owned this ranch for generations, and the deed is right there." Karen froze, her confident stance crumbling just a little as the officer unfolded the papers. The officer scanned the document carefully, his eyes moving from line to line. Then he looked back at me and gave a slow nod. "This looks official," he said, turning to Karen. "And who exactly told you they were trespassing?" Karen stammered, her hands flailing slightly as she tried to regain her composure. I am the head of the HOA, and this land falls under our community." The officer raised a brow, his tone calm but sharp. "Do you have any proof of that?" Karen froze again, her confidence slipping like sand through her fingers. I stepped forward just enough to keep the weight of the moment in my favor. "This ranch has been in my family for over 150 years, I said, my voice carrying steady across the quiet air. "No HOA has jurisdiction here, and my daughter has every right to ride her pony on her own land." Sarah lifted her chin a little, her eyes sparkling with pride as she looked up at me. The officer finally turned his full attention to Karen and asked, "Ma'am, do you have any documentation to support your claim?" Karen faltered, her lips pressed tight before she muttered something about the HOA board promising her authority. But the officers were no longer interested in excuses. They knew the truth was in their hands, and the truth was clear. The second officer handed the deed back to me with respect in his tone. "Sir, thank you for showing us this. We have what we need." I tucked the document safely away, then placed my hand gently on Sarah's shoulder. She leaned into me, her small body relaxing now that she knew we were safe. Karen stood there, pale and stiff, her earlier bravado evaporating into the evening air. The officers exchanged a look, then one of them stepped forward, speaking firmly to her. "Ma'am, if you continue to harass this family, you may be facing consequences yourself." The color drained from Karen's face as the weight of the warning settled in. Karen opened her mouth as if to argue, but no words came out. Instead, she stumbled back a step, clutching the strap of her purse like it was the only thing holding her upright. Sarah squeezed my hand, her small voice carrying more strength than I had ever heard before. "Daddy, can we go ride now?" I smiled at her and gave a small nod. "Yes, sweetheart, you go on ahead." She ran toward the paddock, her laughter breaking the tension in the air while the officers stood watch, their presence a quiet shield around us. Karen lingered at the edge of the driveway, her eyes darting between me, the officers, and the wide open fields that stretched beyond the barn. She seemed smaller, now, not the loud, intimidating woman she had been only minutes earlier. I walked closer to her, my boots crunching against the gravel, every step deliberate. You thought you could scare my daughter off her own land, I said, my tone calm, but edged with steel. But you picked the wrong family. Karen swallowed hard, her voice shaky. I didn't realize you. I cut her off before she could finish. I am a veteran. I have fought harder battles than this, and I will fight again if I need to protect my family and our home. The words hung heavy between us, carried by the silence of the wide ranch fields. Karen took another step back, her shoulders slumping as if the fight had drained from her completely. One of the officers crossed his arms, watching her carefully, as if daring her to try again. Sarah's pony trotted into the field, her joyful shouts echoing across the land like music that reminded me what all this was for. I turned my gaze back to Karen, steady and unyielding. You will not come here again, do you understand? Her lips parted, but all that escaped was a quiet nod. Karen clutched her purse tighter, her knuckles white as she nodded again, her eyes darting away from mine like she was searching for an escape from the weight of the truth. The officers exchanged a glance, one of them clearing his throat before stepping closer. Looks like this is settled, ma'am. I suggest you head on home and let this family be. Karen opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, but when she caught the firm look in the officer's eyes, she quickly turned on her heel and walked briskly toward her car, her heels clicking against the gravel. I stood there, arms crossed, watching her until the car door slammed and her engine roared to life, the sound fading as she sped down the long road away from the ranch. Sarah called out from the paddock, her laughter filling the air again. Daddy, look, she's running so fast. I chuckled, shaking my head. She just realized something important, sweetheart. This ranch is ours, and no one can take it from us. The officers gave me a respectful nod, one of them saying quietly, you serve this country, sir, and now you stand strong for your land, too. We will make sure this is written up the right way, so she doesn't try again. I thanked them and walked back toward the paddock where Sarah was waiting, her eyes bright with excitement, her pony trotting happily at her side. I leaned on the fence, watching her for a moment, pride swelling in my chest. The ranch bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, each corner of it whispering with history and strength. The wind carried the scent of hay and earth, and as I breathed it in, I felt the same steady calm I had felt in faraway fields when the fight was over and the silence meant survival. Karen might have come with her threats, but the ranch stood strong just like it always had, and now everyone knew it was not just land, it was home, it was legacy, and it was guarded by a veteran who would never back down. Sarah ran toward me, her boots kicking up little clouds of dust as she held the reins of her pony with one hand and waved at me with the other. Daddy, she said, breathless with excitement. Did you see her face? She looked like she saw a ghost. I laughed and lifted her into my arms, spinning her around once before setting her back down on the packed dirt. You were braver than anyone out here today, I said. She tried to scare you, but you stood your ground just like a true rancher. Sarah puffed out her chest proudly, her eyes shining. I wasn't scared, Daddy. I knew you would come. I knelt down, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, and kissed her forehead, and I always will, I promised. The sound of hooves echoed across the field as our horses moved lazily in the distance, their silhouettes golden against the horizon. The barn doors creaked as the wind passed through, and the old wooden structure seemed to sigh with the same relief I felt. Neighbors began arriving, curious after hearing the commotion earlier. A few leaned on the fence, asking what had happened, and when I told them about Karen and the officers, they shook their heads knowingly. She has caused trouble for others too, one man said, but you showed her today that this ranch is not one she can push around. I nodded, glancing back at Sarah, who was already tugging her pony toward the stables, humming a little tune as if nothing had happened. She had a strength in her spirit that reminded me of her mother, and that gave me more courage than I ever admitted out loud. As the sun dipped lower, the ranch glowed in shades of orange and pink, the air growing cooler and calm. I walked the fence line, checking it with careful eyes, feeling the land beneath my boots, the same land I had fought to protect in more ways than one. Every sound of the evening seemed louder now, the call of the crickets, the rustle of the trees, the low snort of a horse in the distance. This place was alive, and I was alive with it, stronger because Sarah believed in me and because no one, not even Karen, could take that away. As I walked back toward the porch, Sarah ran ahead of me, her boots clattering on the wooden steps. She sat on the top step, swinging her legs and looking out over the pasture as if she were guarding it herself. Daddy, she asked softly, do you think Karen will come back? I leaned against the porch railing, my arms crossed. She might, I said, but if she does, she will find out again that this land is ours, and we do not back down. Sarah nodded as though she understood more than her years should allow. Her eyes followed the horses grazing peacefully by the fence line, and a small smile returned to her lips. I think the ranch knows you are protecting it, Daddy, she whispered. Her words struck me deep. I had always believed the land carried its own memory, its own heartbeat that tied us to it, and maybe she was right. Maybe the ranch itself stood stronger because we stood with it. The evening air grew cooler, and the scent of hay and dust wrapped around us. The old windmill creaked in rhythm, and the barn cats darted across the yard chasing shadows. Sarah slid closer to me, resting her small hand on mine, and I felt the quiet power of that moment. I glanced at the horizon where the sky turned from fire to deep purple. The stars were beginning to break through one by one, a reminder that no matter how dark the night became, there was always light above waiting to guide us. Sarah leaned her head against my arm and let out a content sigh. Daddy, she murmured, I like when it is just us, and the ranch, it feels safe. I smiled, pulling her close, and looked out over the land that carried both our past and our future. The silence of the night was not empty, it was strong, it was alive, and it told me that whatever came next, we would face it together. The crickets began their nightly chorus, filling the air with a steady hum. The lantern on the porch flickered, casting soft light that danced across the wooden boards. Sarah traced little circles on my arm with her finger lost in her own thoughts. I reckon Karen won't give up easy, she finally said, her voice low. She seemed more like she was talking to herself than to me. Maybe not, I answered, but people like her only know how to push until someone pushes back harder. When they find a wall stronger than their will, they usually crumble. Sarah lifted her head to look at me, her eyes full of curiosity. Was the army like that too, Daddy? People pushing until someone stopped them. I paused, letting the weight of her question settle. Yes, sweetheart, I said quietly. The army taught me that standing firm sometimes means more than fighting. It means not letting fear or pride break you. It means protecting the ones who depend on you no matter what. She nodded slowly, as if storing the words away for later. Her gaze drifted back to the pasture, where the horses were now lying in the grass. The night breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the smell of fresh earth and distant rain. Daddy, she asked again, after a moment, would Grandma and Grandpa be proud that we are still here? I smiled at that, my chest tightening with both sorrow and pride. They would be more than proud, Sarah, I told her. They would say we are doing exactly what this family was meant to do: keep the land safe, live honest, and never bow to anyone who does not belong here. Sarah leaned back against me again, her small frame warm and steady. I could feel her breathing slow as she began to drift toward sleep. I kept my eyes on the horizon, where the stars multiplied and the moon climbed higher, bathing the ranch in silver light. The quiet of the night was deep, but it was not empty. It carried with it the voices of the past and the strength of the land itself, reminding me that we were never truly standing alone. The night deepened and the world around us grew still. The lantern flame finally dimmed, and the soft hum of the crickets seemed to lull Sarah into a peaceful sleep. Her head rested against my shoulder, her breath even and calm. I lifted her gently and carried her inside. Laying her in her bed, she curled into her blanket without waking, and I stood there for a moment, just watching her, safe, protected, and unaware of the storm that had nearly uprooted us. When I stepped back outside, the stars were brighter than ever. The old ranch stretched before me, quiet, proud, and unbroken. I thought about Karen and the HOA, about their threats and demands, but none of it mattered now. The truth was clear and unshakable. This land had stood for generations through drought, storms, and hardship, and now it stood with me, a veteran, a father, and its rightful owner. No paper, no meeting, no neighbor could take that away. I placed my hand on the wooden post of the porch, feeling the grain rough beneath my palm. It was more than wood, more than soil, more than fences. It was family, it was sacrifice, it was legacy. As the wind whispered through the fields, I felt peace settle in my chest. Karen and her kind could rage all they wanted, but they would never own what they could not understand. The ranch was ours and always would be. And with that, I closed the door behind me, knowing the fight was over and the land was safe at last.